HOA Beat. I'm Cindy Sullivan with Key Community Management. Today we have attorney Ben Karb with us from Moretz Skufca.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So we want to talk about something that's really important to be effective with what we do and who we serve, and that's how to have better board meetings. So we have some thoughts for you we wanted to share. We're just going to go right into some ideas and talk through that. So Ben, what are some ways to make board meetings more effective overall?
Well, there's actually a lot of different ways, and we're going to talk about some. This is certainly not an exhaustive list of every way, but these are some techniques that are tried and true and have worked for other boards, and certainly your boards may find that these are helpful. A board meeting really is intended to be a culmination of various steps. It is not supposed to be the final step of a board without having ever considered any of the items beforehand. What I mean by that is a board should have been presented with an agenda beforehand, along with copies of contracts for them to review in advance of the meeting. Very important topics may have been discussed with the board beforehand. The agenda should be sufficiently detailed so that the board can stay on topic and the topics are actually known, and there may even be time periods allocated for each topic so that you stay really on point and get business accomplished.
So maybe also with some bids that we've seen come in that are very detailed, very lengthy, a lot of information to review, it's helpful to have that in advance too. Whether it's from the landscaper or the pool company for a large repair.
Sure, yeah. I think anything complex should not really be seen for the very first time at a board meeting. You want your board to come to the meeting educated and prepared to discuss the important issues. They don't need to be reading the contract at the table and trying to determine what's in it. You would hope that a board would have looked it over beforehand.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. So basically, the board meeting setting is really the end of a process and not the beginning. Right, with the exception of any new business, anything that's coming up that was not placed on the agenda. But it should be basically a time where you're voting on these items, right? You're making decisions.
Right, a board meeting is really fundamentally just a discussion where the sides, the pros and the cons, debate back and forth. That doesn't mean it has to be an angry debate, but you discuss the pros and the cons, because the point is to have an educated board that makes a reasoned and rational decision. And that's really what you're trying to accomplish.
Very good. What we find is that some boards want to discuss items that are off topic, or maybe the discussion sort of lingers for a lengthy time period. What can we do to avoid that?
Well, first off, I think is practice. There are very few people that are born with the knowledge of how to conduct an effective board meeting. Sure. That goes for property managers, for directors, for attorneys. The property manager needs to educate the board, and you need to learn the proper habits early on, because it's a lot harder to change bad habits than to form new habits. And I think you really just need to get your boards in the habit of doing things the right way so that you can actually mold the proper habits rather than change bad ones.
Sure, and I think it's important, to be respectful of everyone's time. Oftentimes the property manager is driving maybe 45 minutes to attend a meeting, right? If there are any vendors there, they're coming from a far location. And sometimes the homeowners, they just walked over to the clubhouse, right, for the meeting. So they're not thinking really about, that didn't take them any time. So I think that's good. We're trying to make everyone mindful of, hey, let's be concise, let's have a productive meeting, and then let's be done.
Right, and I think you'll find that you have more involved board members if the meetings are productive. I think board members become disinterested as the meetings become less and less productive. So I think you'll find that you get more accomplished once the board realizes that there is an end to the whole process, and that is the meeting.
I think that's great. And then they would see progress over time. Hey, here's all the things we've accomplished this year. When they're having their annual meeting, they really have pride in what they've done.
Sure.
Right? That's the end result is, hey guys, here's what we did for you this year. So what does it take to make a good board president or chairperson?
Well, a chairperson, a good one, is a product of practice. And really it is a person who's able to steer the conversation rather than dictate the conversation. You want the president who is typically the chair of the board, to basically steer the members to have a positive discussion, to hear the pros and the cons. And a good chair is going to encourage the other members of the board to speak, to voice their opinions. Fundamentally, as I mentioned a moment ago, really what we're trying to get is everybody's opinions on the table so that we as a board can see all sides of an issue and then come out with the best decision. And a good chair does not have to be the person that's the loudest in the room or speaks the most. A good chair is someone who really directs the conversation and is the conductor more so than the person who's really the bully in the room. So I think a good chair is something that's learned over time, and certainly people are better than others, but it's really a honed set of skills.
So they're really the facilitator, is what we're saying. They're just moving things through proper process and not dictating anything.
Right. And that's not to say that a chair can't sometimes dictate the conversation. A good chair, I think, will steer things in the direction that that the board needs it to go. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be the person that is the loudest and yelling at everyone and sort of being the bully. It doesn't always have to be that person.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about Robert's Rules of Order. So how does that help us, incorporate just structure through this process?
Sure. Robert's Rules, that is a daunting topic. Anybody who's picked up a copy of Robert's Rules of Order knows that it is a 750-page book. And what it is basically Henry Robert, who was a general back in the 1800s, I believe, a long time ago, came up with his rules of order that are basically guideposts for holding an effective meeting of an assembly. Really what it's intended for is a very large group of people who are conducting business. Mm-hmm. Now, it has some applicability to a board meeting because you can really condense some of those rules down and tailor them to your particular board. That is not to say that every board meeting has to be as formal as perhaps a lot of Robert's rules, but some of the techniques can actually help us get through a meeting and get business accomplished. And the first thing that we keep in mind and what people think of with Robert's rules is that it comes down to motions. And a motion is synonymous with the word question. If I wanted to put before the group a question about whether to sign a landscaping contract, I'd say, I move that we sign a landscaping contract. In a large group, you would want somebody to second that motion. A second is really a gatekeeper function. You don't want to discuss a topic unless at least one other person thinks it's worthy of discussion. So the person says, I move to sign the landscaping contract. Someone else says, I second that motion. Well, now it's in front of the group and you can talk about it.
So what if there is no second? That's a good point.
Well, in a large group, you may want a second. Unfortunately, you sometimes have people who want to get the conversation derailed and talk about things that really aren't proper at that time. Mm-hmm. You may have a member of the crowd who just really wants bright red doors. Well, if that's not on the agenda or it's not the topic of discussion, you don't want to have somebody start talking about red doors.
Sure.
At least not if someone else is not willing to at least second that.
So the chairperson might then say, motion is not accepted, or something like that.
Yeah, and if no one seconds it, it
dies.
You just move on. Yes, it does die.
Okay.
And really what the process is that the person makes a motion, and then in a small board you don't really have to have someone second it, but if someone seconds it, then the chair is supposed to repeat the motion. Right. Basically to state it for the group as to what we're going to discuss.
Because I think it's important. Sometimes it's not clear, right? We had this happen last night at a board meeting. One board member thought one thing, the other one said, no, this is what I meant by that in terms of what we're voting on. So you have to be clear.
Right, and it's important to repeat the question for that reason, just to make sure everybody's on the same page about what we're even discussing. But it also helps the secretary. The secretary then knows what the topic of discussion is, so in the meeting minutes it can reflect what we're actually discussing. So it serves several purposes. Now, once the chair repeats the question, then we as a group, we talk about it, the pros and the cons. We go back and forth, talk about the good and the bad, And once the debate is finished, then the chair will essentially ask if anybody has any more comments, and if not, then the chair repeats the question and the group votes on it. And that's really the process. It's intended just to gather knowledge and to
move
ultimately
through it. So, sometimes some more research might be needed on an item that they were thinking they would vote on and they didn't. So that would be where you might table the discussion for a later date, that kind of thing, and it'll be noted to be on the next agenda.
Right.
Like that.
Yeah. You can basically take a topic that is perhaps exceeding the time limit that you allocated for it, or it wasn't even on the agenda to begin with, and you can postpone it to either later in that meeting or even to another meeting. So you could take something that really was not on the agenda, the red doors, for example, and you could put that on the next month's meeting at the top of the agenda. So sure, it does get its due, but we're not taking this meeting to go around in circles about an issue that we weren't anticipating.
Weren't prepared for. Well, and I think what's good is, I always like to say you can't save the world in one day, So you know what, you can't have everything on your agenda at one time. You just can't. So you prioritize, and some of it just has to wait. So how do we keep boards from just from going around and around on the same topic? I guess sometimes a community manager might have to step in if the chairman doesn't address a concern.
Right. Well, if we keep coming back to the same people who are speaking and repeating the same things over and over again, or we just are kind of in a circle, one thing that the chair can do is he or she can create a committee to basically research that topic and then present at the following meeting. That's one way of handling it. Or you could even assign it to particular directors, oftentimes the people who are most adamant, either for or against, and say, okay, will you please describe for a few minutes at the next meeting the highlights of what you've discussed tonight, so that we can then take this up again for consideration and make a decision. And that's one way of doing it. You can also, if you have a lot of people who are repeating the same things over and over, you could alternate between the pros and the cons. So if you've got different viewpoints, you're alternating between them, so you're getting a better cross-section of what everybody thinks.
That's good. That's good. And so maybe sometimes to give people an assignment to come back, it might calm them down, be able to move on to the next agenda item, and just say, we're going to cover that when we have more information.
Right. And I think when someone has a particular task assigned to them, I think it makes them be more focused, so that you take less time at the next meeting. And it's also informative, so it really serves two purposes.
They also take ownership over it, right? That's what we see. If sometimes if someone's upset about something, or just there's some passion, right? If they can take a little bit of ownership, then do some research. That seems to be a positive thing to do.
Right.
So that's great. Thank you for your insights on that. We want to talk about our question of the day, which is, how often should an HOA board meet? We get that question a lot from communities that are new to key community management, and maybe just looking to improve their processes. So where do we make that determination from?
Well, that's a good question. And we first go to our governing documents. A lot of times the bylaws will have a standard for how many times the board has to meet, a minimum number of times. Now, that's not to say a board can't meet more frequently, but oftentimes it'll say quarterly or twice a year, things like that. What our statutes say is that the board has to meet regularly. What that often means is that quarterly. Now, some boards may need to meet once a week if you've got a pressing issue, or you're a big community, or it's that time of year perhaps.
Sure.
Other boards may need to meet less frequently. So I think first you look at your governing documents, and then you decide based on the needs of your community.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Sometimes the governing documents are more specific, and sometimes they're not. So you fall back on the statute. Sure. With when there's vagueness. So let's talk about our "Can you believe that" segment. We've managed a lot of communities, and we try to really help each community move forward and progress. One of the boards that we've been working with a long time, it's a small single-family home community. They don't have any amenities. For some reason, they like to meet monthly. So we attend the meetings quarterly. but they continue to meet monthly. So what we find is that their agenda items seem to just linger and repeat month after month after month, and then projects they've been talking about sort of never end, never come to conclusion. And we still are continuing to encourage them to sort of step back and say, you really don't have a need to meet monthly. I think what's important is when you're seeing, slow progress on items, things that are repeated, we just continue to try to train the board members, especially as new people come on. Sometimes they're more open to, different ways. But we also want to encourage boards to really see what the administrative needs and the project needs are for their community specifically, because I don't know, these folks might have had an experience in a townhome community and that's all they're used to is monthly. So anyway, we're still working on changing their ways, but we want to encourage you to contact us if you have questions about your board meetings and how you can do things better. And we also have some podcasts and blogs on our website. For more information, take a look. Ben, thank you for being here today. We appreciate all your insights. So until next time, make your community great and don't miss a beat.